What's the most messed up illegal thing that went down at your high school? Before I get into the thick of what went down, I need to tell you a bit about these things called weeplus. Basically, weeplus were these little balls of fluff about the size of golf balls, or at least they were at the time. They'd often have googly eyes, tiny hats, plastic feet, or some other decoration, making them look like a craft project made by a bunch of 5-year-olds. These weeplus were a hot item back in 6th and 7th grade because you could earn them as a reward for selling magazine subscriptions during our school's annual fundraiser. If you had the right weeplus, you could even win some serious cash in the daily contests. I know, it sounds a little confusing, but even back then it was hard to follow. The gist of it was this: you get different kinds of weeplus for selling different amounts of magazine subscriptions. Then, each day, every student who owned a Weeple got to draw a piece of candy from a hat. If the candy had a sticker on it, the student would win a certain amount of money, which was then multiplied by how many Weeplus they had, plus an additional multiplier. But you know what? All that detail is not really what's important. What's crucial is that certain teachers saw this whole thing as a way to threaten or bribe students. There was this one girl, for example, who was told she would win $50 if she gave up her spot in some competition so that the teacher's son could take it. Then there was this other student who got told that if he didn't take responsibility for a fire alarm someone else pulled, his winnings would be taken away. Now, nothing that terrible happened, at least not that I know of, but there were enough shady deals going on that the whole event just felt pretty messed up even for those of us who didn't have a hand in it. And here's the real kicker. A student offered another student a mature favor in exchange for his weeplus. When the school found out about it, the student who offered the favor got suspended, not for what you'd expect, but because it was against the rules of the fundraiser to give or share weeplus. It's crazy, right? Harassment and scandals, not a big deal, but share your weeplus with someone and you're out. Story 2. This story happened after I'd left school. I heard it from a teacher I used to get along with. Two 12-year-olds got into a fight that ended with one of them strangling the other. Apparently, the kid who was strangled was legally dead for about 2 minutes. If you're looking for a story from when I was at that school, well, the chef got fired when I was 14. Turns out, he was stashing drugs in the kitchen, which was a problem considering that he made these amazing pizza panini sandwiches. Almost everyone would buy one during break or lunch. When he got canned, there weren't any more pizza paninis, and a third of my year got sick within a few days. They had all the symptoms of drug withdrawals, so we were guessing that the chef was keeping the drugs in with the food. That was rough. I still miss those pizza paninis. Story 3. So, there was this guy in my grade who would collect nudes of just about every girl he could find in school. He was a good-looking guy and was pretty good at flirting, which he used to get girls to send him pictures. And he even convinced some guys to either give or sell him nudes of girls he didn't have pictures of himself. Before you knew it, he had hundreds of photos. I'm talking about pictures of nearly every attractive girl in our grade, even some from other grades. He was a friend of mine, so I heard about how he would sell views of a specific girl's pictures for $5 a view on his phone, or $40 if you wanted him to send it to you. He made hundreds of dollars just from this. I've even seen students go up to him at lunch and just pay him for this. Now, the girls who were in these pictures, they had no idea about any of it. And I was his friend, so I just didn't say anything. I didn't think it was right, but I never ratted him out. And he made sure that whenever he was sending girls' nudes to others, he would make them delete the messages and any proof. It took a long time for the school to find out about it, but before authorities could take his phone, he had deleted everything. Later, I talked to him about it, and he told me he still had those nudes on his computer, but he was keeping them off his phone now. So, he never got in trouble with the law. Narrator comment. It's important to add here, and this is something I didn't realize at the time, but CP is absolutely not okay. If you see it, report it. I was stupid to ignore it back then. This guy wasn't a bad person otherwise, but it's not an excuse. I definitely wouldn't just let something like that slide now, and neither should you. Oh, and it's never okay when attractive people use their powers for bad. Story 4. So, the first day of my senior year in 2009, I went into my first class, and there was this guy standing awkwardly at the back of the room. My friends and I figured that he was probably a student teacher helping us in class. But when they called his name during attendance, we realized he was a student, and we thought he looked really old. So we kept watching him and learning more about him as the day went on. He told people that he had throat cancer, and that's why he sounded and looked the way he did. He also mentioned that he had just moved here and that he was living with his uncle. A kid in our class had passed away over the summer due to brain cancer, so that kid's friend group, who were pretty popular, welcomed him with open arms. My friend group, who were more on the nerdy side, still thought he was creepy, and we just called him the creepy old guy. That night, my mom told me to be nice to him because I was a new kid once too, so I was planning to talk to him the next day, mostly to appease my mom. But the next day during homeroom, the principal made an announcement that our new classmate was actually 52. He had registered himself at the school while pretending to be his nephew as part of a way to write a book about the lack of security in school systems. I know, it's terrifying thinking about it now. Because of that, the school district beefed up the security, but honestly, who knows what his real plan was? Oh, and the way they found out? He had tattoos on his arms that were really old because the black ink had turned green, and apparently, they don't use that type of ink anymore. I mean, cancer or not, I feel like I could spot a 52-year-old, and how smooth was that guy coming up with an excuse like, "Oh, I was just writing a book about how easy it would be to trick you all." That is just wild. Story 5. I was a band nerd all through school, and that definitely includes high school. When I got to high school, things were turned up a notch. The marching band had these amazing and super cool uniforms. The wind orchestra got to go travel to festivals across the country, and we got to play some seriously awesome core repertoire. It was honestly an unbelievable experience that really shaped who I am today. But here's the twist. I found out later that the only reason we got to do all these things was that the drum major's dad, who was also a student leader, had been stealing a bunch of money from his company and spending it on the music program. It wasn't strictly illegal, but it was definitely shady. And get this, the music director at the school ended up getting into a relationship with one of the students after they graduated. I sure hope everything was on the up and up, but we went on a bunch of long trips with hotel stays and things, so it really sucks that an experience that shaped me into the person I am today was surrounded by all that embezzlement and grooming type stuff. Story 6. Underage relations, drugs, and drinking were all normal stuff at our school. But there was also this massive underground Pokemon and Magic, the Gathering card tournament thing going on. These were eventually banned for some obvious reasons, like gambling and betting on cards. But it was all kept quiet until this one kid brought an expensive card, SLPG, and lost it in an Annie. Then his parents got mad and made a big stink at the PTA meetings until the other kid coughed up the card. After all of that, they unbanned the games, but made Annies illegal. They even had one of the teachers watch the games during their lunch break so that nobody could cheat or play unfairly. Never gamble with anything you're not willing to lose, I guess. Honestly, I don't think that should be illegal, just a valuable life lesson. Story 7. I've got 4 different stories for you. First, there's a teacher who got accused of inappropriately touching some of the boys a few years before I started there. He went to court, but got off because there wasn't enough evidence. About 10 years later, more boys brought similar charges against him. Before he went to court, he took his own life in his front yard by hanging himself from a tree. It's still not clear if he actually did it or if he just didn't want his name dragged through the mud again, and for his family to have to go through all of that. Second, another teacher, who was there about 5 years before me, was accused of not only inappropriately touching, but also having relations with some of his female students. Some of the girls actually protected him, so people couldn't charge him, and the school district just transferred him to another school. Third, while I was there was this guy, Mike, in my grade who worked at the convenience store in town. He started stealing cigarettes and selling them to students at the school, which was double illegal, both for theft and selling tobacco to a minor. The store found out about it and threatened him with charges. He almost got sent to juvenile hall, but the store owner forgave him if he agreed to do some community service and paid back what he stole. Fourth, and this one's not necessarily illegal, but definitely unethical, our school's drama teacher, who was married to the art teacher, started an affair with one of her students. It wasn't illegal because the student was over 18 when the affair started. Towards the end of that year, the drama teacher left her husband and married the student about 6 months after he graduated. Her ex-husband, the art teacher, had a huge mental breakdown. People said he was having bonfires in his backyard and dancing around them in his underwear, singing. He left the next year, and nobody has heard from him since. The teacher and her former student, as far as I know, are still married. Now, just to play devil's advocate, maybe she left him because of all the bonfires and underwear dancing instead of anything else, maybe. Story 8. I graduated 13 years ago, but my sister is 10 years younger than me, so this happened during her senior year. A female teacher and the male athletic director were giving their classes assignments and going to his office to hook up during the school day. They got caught by another staff member who was looking for the teacher after they checked the class and were told she hadn't been there for about 20 minutes. This was in early May. They continued to teach for the rest of the year until June, when the athletic director retired after being given the option of retirement or being fired. The teacher continued to teach. The funny and weird thing, but not haha funny, was that the kids had dedicated the yearbook to him. 20 minutes, good for him, I guess. Story 9. There was a science teacher who got arrested for harassing students online. Then there was this new kid who was super homophobic, decided to prove himself. He kicked in the door to the handicap bathroom because our school had openly trans students using it for their comfort and safety. Inside, he beat the crap out of a girl and ripped out her catheter, leaving her bloody on the floor. He got jumped a week later by both of the main gangs at the school. It turned out the girl he attacked wasn't trans. She had been in a car accident a couple of months earlier and had paralysis from the waist down. She was also a tutor who helped a lot of the students get their grades up. She was pretty well loved by everybody. Last I heard, the guy was in jail and didn't make it out, and the girl passed the bar exam and is still working as a tutor for the school district. I guess, what a turn of events, huh? This guy was clearly phobic, so he attacked someone, then got attacked himself. Circle of life. Story 10. I had a history teacher who was an absolute dog. He kept this yellow folder in his class where he wrote down all of his interactions with students because he was under investigation for harassing and molesting girls on the cheer team. On top of that, he was secretly sleeping with his TA, who was just an old instrument in her senior year of school, at his house often.
He was a real creep.
He'd also throw these study parties at his house every year for his AP classes, which I'm sure was just to help him groom any girls he thought were worth his time. He got arrested a few years later for having a bunch of cocaine, along with all the other usual illegal stuff. But my absolute favorite story from this school involves the French teacher. This woman was a bit oblivious. Some kids were hitting a pipe in the back of the classroom when she wasn't looking, and when she noticed the smoke and smell of pot, she freaked out. She couldn't figure out who was doing it, so she closed all the windows and the door so nobody in the hall could know about it, effectively hotboxing her entire class. Good times. Man, that's one way to handle things, or maybe she knew exactly what was going on and thought the best way to get to the bottom of things was to help everyone loosen up a little bit. Story 11. My driver's ed teacher was dating this 17-year-old girl from a nearby high school. When she broke up with him, he snapped her neck and left her in the woods to die. For the next few days, he'd have his driving students drive by the park where he left her to see if any cops were there. They found her after a couple of days and arrested him right on school grounds. She ended up with permanent brain damage, and he's still in jail about 15 years later. Narrator comment. Oh, I forgot to add this part. Back when they'd record the country line dancing nights at some bar and play them on a local TV station, they caught him doing some line dancing just after he dumped her body. Because, gotta do some country line dancing after an attempted murder to calm the nerves. As they say, nothing like going to a hoedown after you beat the hoe down. Story 12. We used to use this drain tunnel system under our high school to skip class. Someone would cut the fence during holidays, which led to this tunnel. It was quite the complex system. It would lead all the way to the train station, a 20-minute walk from the school. There were chairs and tables in little pockets of space where people would hang out and use and sell weed and MDMA. It was used by people from year 7 through 12. This is until the dealer kids beat the crap out of someone because of his debt. Then there was this other thing. This Asian guy hated this other guy for calling him school shooter and other names, and because this particular guy would always use this specific path to get to the tunnels, the Asian guy literally set a trap and put brush over a hole there. The guy ended up breaking both of his legs. The guy who kept calling him names like school shooter should have been calling him Bugs Bunny instead. Story 13. This happened after one summer break. A girl, who had been kind of overweight before, seemed to have slimmed down a bit, not a lot, but just enough that you noticed. Then she'd put all the weight back on, and then a few days later, it melted right off, and then back on again. For about half the year, she kept losing and gaining weight. Turned out, she had lost weight and even managed to keep it off for the most part. Everyone thought she was just struggling with her diet, but what was really happening was that she was smuggling bags of weed into the school by taping them to her belly. She'd pat her shirt to make it look more natural. You know what? Respect to her for losing the weight. She probably did it just so she could smuggle weed, but, everyone's got their motivations. Story 14. A history teacher who'd been working at our school for about 30 years got convicted for grooming and sleeping with several students. A former student who'd graduated years before came out and told what was happening and even showed proof, including emails, private notes, and even a sexually suggestive yearbook signing. After that, multiple people started coming forward. The faculty had known what was happening and just swept it all under the rug. Our superintendent, who's now running for mayor, was quoted as saying, "This is a man's life we're talking about," when one of the students made a complaint. I mean, what is wrong with this guy? What about all the children who are being harassed and assaulted? This is a man's life we're talking about. Thanks, dude, you've got my vote not. Story 15. They had a problem with students selling weed at school. The issue was that they could only catch the small dealers but not the main supplier. They never found out who it was, but it was someone who was well-liked enough that the 10 or so dealers they caught refused to give out any names. It was actually a friend of mine. Everyone knew, but she let her dealers keep a good profit, and she put all her own profits towards her dad's medical expenses. Everyone thought she was babysitting when she was actually just staying out of the house to make it seem like she was off babysitting. Not a single person said a word. Her dad is perfectly healthy now, and he loves bragging about how his daughter gave up her hard-earned money to help him. So we all think it's a win. I'm so glad I could help fund your medical bills, dude. Yeah. Story 16. The girls in my classroom tried to poison our biology teacher during lab class. Apparently, the teacher went to the bathroom, and while she was gone they went to the shelf and poured whatever they could find into her water bottle. Nobody knew exactly what it was. When she came back, she smelled the water and realized something was off. They weren't expelled, and no charges were filed. We lived in a small town away from any big cities, but they were suspended for a few weeks. Just to make it clear, we were a large classroom group, so we would often split up by genre for classes. So, while the girls were in biology trying to poison their teacher, the boys were in English class. It does make you wonder what they might have found in the English teacher's water bottle. Subjects, predicates, oh my. Story 17. This incident didn't happen at my high school, but she was my 8th grade social studies teacher in middle school. She was busted for embezzling money from local elementary schools, about 34 grand in all. Pretty small potatoes compared to the other stories here, but what made it memorable was that she had this air about her because she used to be a speechwriter for Barbara Bush. She claimed she was one of the more accomplished teachers at our middle school. Then, years later, I found out she was busted for ripping off schools to pay for her own stuff. I guess she left Washington, but Washington never left her. What a shame. She was bragging about being a speechwriter for Barbara Bush, when, in fact, middle schoolers would have been way more impressed to hear that she was embezzling money. Story 18. My high school is right next to a military base, and there are these old secret tunnels under the school that go into the military base, since the building used to be part of the base. Well, some people from my grade and the grade below went into the tunnels and snooped around. Not only were they trespassing, they were trespassing on military property. There wasn't much in there anymore, although there was a bed and some religious symbols. The bed looked like it had been slept in recently. Like, there was no dust on it or anything. So, you stumbled into what might have been some kind of underground prison, and then just left it there? I really need to know more about that. Story 19. We had this shared movies folder on the school network where everyone would upload their pirated movies. The next thing you know, all the boys are separated from the girls and get an assembly with the local police. The police told us that even though we ourselves are underage, just having a copy of any image or video that is considered CP is the same as being in possession of it. The next thing that happens is that one of the kids starts arguing with the cops, saying that the girls should be in more trouble for the production and distribution of CP. In the end, a few of the girls left our school, and the kid who argued with the cops also ended up leaving. That kid sounds like quite the delinquent, to be like, no, 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 I mean I did something wrong, but they definitely should be in trouble too. Story 20. This was back in the early 2000s, and there was a zero-tolerance policy at my school when it came to fighting. If you got into a fight, you got arrested. But kids still wanted to fight, as kids do. So, our PE coach had this policy where if you wanted to fight in PE class, he'd let you. But the catch was that you had to let him spank you first. If you got your spanking, he'd lock you, the other guy, and himself in the locker room and let you duke it out while he watched. He also let anyone else in the class watch if they wanted to, but if you wanted to watch, you also had to get spanked. It's one of those things that 15 years later you talk to your friends about it and you're like, dude, did that really happen? Or did I just imagine all of that? Knowing what we know now, it's so weird and creepy. But when all of your friends agree, yeah, that actually did happen and we all remember it too, then at least you know you aren't the crazy one. What kind of weird transaction was that? Holy crap. If they wanted to fight so bad, they should have beat that guy up. Story 21. This one girl wanted to improve her math grade, so she offered her teacher mature favors to give her a passing grade. The teacher declined, but didn't report her. Big mistake. The girl then told everyone that it was the teacher who made those offers to her, etc., and that she was the one who declined. That story got out of hand, and the principal and her parents found out about it and sued him. The teacher was fired, and his wife left him. But at the court hearing, the girl made some mistakes in her story, and things didn't add up, so the judge and defense had further questions for her. Because she hadn't thought everything through properly, she had to admit that she lied because he had refused her offer. The teacher got rehired but looked 10 years older. His wife didn't come back because she'd already found a new guy. I'm still in contact with him though. He was the best teacher I ever had. Most people didn't believe the accusations, but obviously, actions had to be taken. The school now has a policy that no teacher can have a discussion with a girl without another student or teacher present, and with the door closed. Not only to protect the students, but also to protect the teachers. All of this is messed up, but holy crap, that wife moved on fast. No respect, I tell ya. Story 22. I saw kids about 14 or 15 years old doing hard drugs. I have no idea where they got the money from or who in their right mind would sell it to them. But me, being a few years older and never having even thought about doing something like that, was absolutely terrified. Now, a few years later, I'm meeting kids as young as 12 who smoke and drink. At that age, I was playing RuneScape for 12 hours a day. Where did we go wrong? Oh, but some people say RuneScape is just as, or even more addictive. Ever meet a guy who opens up his trench coat and says, "You got the stuff?" And he just pulls out a dragon axe and some iron chain mail? Just a thought. Story 23. We had this really cool substitute teacher. He was in his 50s, and he had a big white beard, which made him look like Santa. And as it turned out, he actually worked as a part-time mall Santa. My Spanish teacher loved him, so he subbed for our class pretty often. He'd always bring a tote bag full of trinkets, so he could do magic tricks for the class, distracting us from our work in the best way possible. He was also super witty and would roast the crap out of the more disruptive and disrespectful students. We all liked him. He was a great guy. That is, until he was convicted for over 5 dozen counts of possession of CP. It really caught us all by surprise, considering that he wasn't even creepy compared to some of the other older substitutes that we had. So, never trust a mall Santa, I guess. Story 24. Oh man, I have a story to tell. It's not from my school, but from the rival high school in the area. There was this creepy dude who harassed the cheerleading squad and kept getting talked to about it by the school. He claimed he wasn't being creepy and was just trying to be nice to the girls because he's a nice guy. Yes, that kind of nice guy. Eventually, he got fed up with the rejection and decided to hack into the entire cheerleading team's Snapchats. He then made a new Twitter account, probably set up a ton of VPNs too, and started tweeting at the cheerleaders, saying stuff like, "It's too late for second chances," and "Daddy probably hates this." If the cheerleader he added didn't apologize or do what he wanted, he'd leak their nudes. This went on for a few weeks, and they couldn't figure out who this guy was. To the girls, it was pretty obvious who it was though. When it became clear that he was a suspect, he mass-released all the nudes, as well as nudes from the entire football team. He's in prison now. No offense to Twitter, but it makes sense that he'd use that platform. Story 25. We had 2 insane cases over the course of 3 weeks. A kid from my debate team got stabbed to death by middle schoolers while selling them Juul pods. Then a kid from my choir attempted to unalive himself by jumping from the 4th floor and got completely paralyzed. The school had to put up gates over the ledges on all of the floors after another kid tried to do the same thing. A friend of mine got caught selling acid on campus. A girl who was new to the campus tried to have relations with one of the popular guys in my friend group to climb the social ladder, and when it didn't work, she claimed that he essayed her, but was proven wrong through text messages. When YK-YAK was a thing, there was a lot of cyberbullying. Unfortunately, I took part in it, and I felt terrible about it afterward. I personally apologized to the person I harassed, and they're doing okay, and I still keep up with them. Not illegal, but this next one is the worst story I've heard. A girl from my friend group had relations with her boyfriend for the first time. Afterward, she couldn't control her bowels and crapped all over the wall. When her parents got home, she blamed it on their old dog, who they had to put down because they thought he was really sick. I don't know if that one's true, but all the other ones I witnessed firsthand or heard about through the news. Public school in Texas is like the Wild West, man. You animal, you got the dog killed. Story 26. About 20 or so years ago, in high school, I got caught smoking a joint with a buddy by the drama teacher. He was kind of cool about it, though. He confiscated it and told us never to let him catch us again, or else some sort of drama credit was required for graduation. That wasn't my thing, so I signed up for stagecraft and painted sets. Anyway, I had that same drama teacher for that class later that day. I get to his class, he gets everyone working, and then he calls me and my buddy over. We go backstage, and the drama teacher says, "You guys have a lot of work to do." We said nope, and then the teacher goes, "You want to go out back and finish that joint I took from you guys? I have one too." We stepped out back onto some loading docks and smoked joints with the drama teacher. It wasn't as nefarious as murder or child molestation, but we actually thought he was pretty freaking cool after that. But illegal nonetheless. If that isn't a drama teacher story. Story 27. Our school networks in high school and college weren't very secure, so I spent a lot of my time altering grades, taking tests, and stealing papers written by other students and reselling them. All for money. I would sell these services to wealthy people or athletes who were struggling to stay academically eligible for their respective sports teams. There were several staff members at my college who knew about this and looked the other way. I lived with several members of the football team for 2 years, rent-free, as long as I helped them with their grades. Aunt Becky ain't got crap on me. She just got her messed up daughter into school. I helped people graduate college at the top of their class or with honors. I mean, illegal, but holy crap, is this guy awesome? Story 28. The principal got fired for improper use of school funds. He bought exercise equipment like a stationary bike and a treadmill, I think, and just kept them in his office. He also bought a riding lawnmower that he apparently stored at the school but would just take to his house whenever he felt like using it. And it wasn't the kind of lawnmower you could use on the school grounds. It was too small. And get this, he signed his own requisition forms. That's just weird, right? The school funds seemed oddly low, and the principal's yard always looked really well kept. Story 29. Not counting my brother's bookie business, we had a few things going on. This was back in the early days of soda machines taking dollar bills. Not actual counterfeiting, mind you, but you could photocopy a dollar bill and the machine would take it. The school caught onto it pretty quickly and said they'd expel anyone doing it. So, then it became about gluing a string to a real dollar bill, letting it go in, getting credit, and then yanking the dollar back out. Someone was also really good at making and selling bootleg DVDs and CDs. Not me, of course. That's illegal, Mr. FBI officer. And of course, there were the many people who sold weed. Prices got really good due to all the competitive pricing. I never bought any, but I should have, maybe. Someone even grew some marijuana a couple of times. Not me, of course, Mr. Officer. And I also didn't try the whole SpongeBob tactic of tying money to a string and tricking the machines. I'm well within my rights. Story 30. A guy called in a fake school shooting threat because he found out his girlfriend was going to break up with him that day. Only about 20% of the student body showed up that day, myself included. My English teacher gave us all a free 20 points, which was about 3% of the final grade, for showing up. A girl was expelled for having relations underneath the desk while watching Bill Nye the Science Guy, and a guy got expelled his senior year for getting in a yelling match and pulling a knife out of his shoe. Oh, and a guy got caught messing around to some MLP hentai in the bandroom closet. I'm pretty sure there was more, but this is just the stuff that happened in my graduating class. And they say romance is dead. Seriously, guys, don't do that, though. Story 31. The high school band director was accused of being a diddler a couple of years after I left. He had multiple daughters in that school and the school district, which I felt terrible for, having to deal with all of that. At the middle school, somebody literally got what I believe to be the proper term, curb stomped. I believe he survived, but I can't imagine without serious effects. There was also a kid who used to stab me with his safety pins, and one day I picked up a fire ant mound with my bare hands and threw it at him. I told teachers previously what was going on, but he was never really punished for it. You could say I took matters into my own hands. Fighting with my fists wasn't my thing, and I didn't want to start a brawl. Don't ask me why the ant pile seemed like the best option at the time, but that was a crap school. Fighting fire with fire ants, huh? Alright, I'll see myself out. Story 32. So this might be the most unique one, since I'm guessing by now this thread is full of sex with students, selling drugs, assault, and everything in between. Anyway, I heard about a couple of guys at our sister high school who were in a computer service class. Think of it like an off-hour class, but you get service hours for helping out the IT department. Being in this class, there were only ever like 3 or 4 guys at a time. You basically help the IT guy out, updating software, hardware, running virus scans, replacing power adapters for the laptops, etc. However, this position afforded you one thing that nearly no one else at the school had: the admin passwords. Now, allegedly, there were a couple of different levels. The basic admin password let you adjust settings on the computers, update firmware, and everything, but there was one above that, which essentially allowed you server-level access. You could log in and have access to every single person's personal drive that was stored on the server. If I remember correctly, they said the drives were labeled with the owner's first initial and last name, so not hard to figure out which drives belonged to the teachers and thus, which ones contained the tests for their class for an entire semester. These guys sold every test, every quiz, everything you could imagine. They had access to incident reports that were in the dean's drive, stuff on teachers in the HR drive, everything. Oh, and I feel it's important to mention that this high school was part of and on a college campus and shared their network. Though they never had a need to, they could have accessed everyone's drives at the university as well. They could have even pulled a fight club and deleted everything. They actually mentioned doing this, but weren't sure if there were backups being stored elsewhere. Wow, so cool, but so illegal, but also so awesome, but not really. I am not condoning it at all. I'm just impressed. But seriously, don't do that.
But wow.